bad.
What's up? Another episode of Reflect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Lorenz, also known as Ricky Brands. We have a great episode for you today. I know I've been telling you that for 200 plus episodes, but I truly feel good about this episode. It's been a while since I've done an episode that I haven't finished and then felt like, wow, that was an amazing conversation, or a sense of fulfillment, or a sense of I got something from this podcast, from this conversation, and I hope the listeners do too. They've all been really interesting and really fun, and it's been truly a pleasure to have these guests on. And sometimes it blows my mind how many people I've had on. I talk to people about the show, and they're like, "Oh, you had this person on, you had that person on," and they're surprised. And I think what they don't realize that I'm equally as surprised sometimes of the people who I get on the show. I think a lot of it is people see that I'm sincere, and I really am just trying to do what I'm telling you I'm trying to do, and that's just have interesting conversations with interesting people, and hopefully we can all grow from that, learn something, and then spread these things. That's all I'm trying to do here. So Jim Abrams is my guest today. He is the filmmaker of some of the funniest and some of my favorite movies of all time. He did The Two Hot Shots. He did Naked Gun movies. He did Airplane. Naked Gun is now available on Netflix, so if you haven't seen that, it doesn't matter what age you are. They're hysterical. They're some of my favorite films, and when you're talking about personal stories that are kind of sad and depressing, and topics that can be sad or depressing, it is important sometimes to just watch something that makes you laugh and smile, because that's what really life is all about, and that's what we should all be striving to do more of. So definitely check out those films. But he's on to talk about the Charlie Foundation, which is an amazing story about his son who had these violent seizures, and how he got them to stop, and then how angry he was that the method he used gave him his son back. And I mean, just think about the strain that it puts on the family. Your kids for years is having, up to 100 seizures a day, violent seizures that could have long-term damage, permanent damage. He's on all these meds that make him a zombie. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. And I think as a parent, it's definitely going to tug at your heartstrings. And then the ketogenic diet ran into that, changed his life, and his most importantly, changed Charlie's life. So we go into all that on the show. So please, if you enjoy the show, share it, tweet it. Like I always tell you, I have a Patreon page, but if you can't support the show financially, share the show, rate the show, do all that type of stuff, because the most important thing is to get these conversations out there. Somebody could listen to this, that it could change their life. Maybe they have a child that is going through similar issues, or maybe they have a family member or a friend that's going through similar things. So if you can help one person by sharing this, then I think it's worthwhile doing it. So please do that. Like I tell you guys, it's open source. So if you want to post on your website, your YouTube channel, I'm struggling to talk right now, your YouTube channel, that's completely fine, because like I said, the most important thing is sharing these conversations. So I do have a Patreon page. If you want to support me there, great. If you want to buy the music that you hear in the show, that's awesome too. I put all the links in the show description on our YouTube channel, which is RV Theory 6, or you can just search the Ripple Effect Podcast. You'll find the YouTube channel. And in the show description, I put links to my music, my Patreon page, my guests' websites, their social media accounts, all that stuff. So if you want to do more research, or if you want to look into anything, easy way of getting that information is just on our YouTube channel's show descriptions. So do that, and I think that's it. Take care, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace. thank you so much for being with me. I was actually ready a little early, but my mother just called and I made the big mistake of picking up the phone right before I do a podcast. I'm like, Mom, I gotta go. I'm like, but yeah, this is a huge pleasure because growing up, actually speaking to my parents, I was born in Portugal, so coming to America, one of the few things that we could watch together was your movies because my parents didn't read or write any English, but the silliness of like Naked Gun and Hot Shots and Airplane, like they could pick up on what was going on and they could pick up the sarcasm. And so we grew up loving your movies. I'm a huge fan. And people are listening, if you haven't watched Naked Gun or Naked Gun, the second one, Naked Gun 2.5, they are two of the funniest movies you will ever watch. And it's like till this day, it's funny. I put it on the other day with my wife because we do a little like date night at night. We put the kids to bed, then we'll pop open a bottle of wine, we'll eat, and we need to spend some time together too. We can't just revolve around the kids. I always say a marriage is a plant that needs to be watered also. If not, then it dies. So it's But so we stayed up and she was like, really? You really still every line and you still laugh? And I was just laughing like it was the first time I watched it. It's just, they were so great. So when I had Dr.
It helps that you were a boy.
Yeah.
We always said, we have this God-given gift for writing fart jokes for 13-year-old boys. And even as us 13-year-old boys grow up and turn into men and old men, we somehow all appreciate those fart jokes.
Yeah. There's a lot of clever lines in those movies too. Like if you just were looking for the physical comedy, you'd miss a lot of just really clever lines, and that's what I really like. I just love the straight face, like saying something so silly but in a straight face. It was just so. I mean, I'll probably start laughing just thinking about some of them now, but it was just, and it's awesome that they're all on Netflix now. So if people are listening, check them out. They're all the Naked Guns are on Netflix, and they're hysterical. So I highly recommend you guys checking out. So it was awesome when I found out about because I've heard the Charlie Foundation quite a few times, but when I got into keto diet some years ago, probably like started doing it probably roughly around 5 years ago, and then I got more and more serious into it, and I've always been a diet and nutrition. And even before all the science started coming out and I started really noticing that there's a lot of good research on it, but prior to that, it was just making sense because I'm like, it kind of makes sense for hunter-gatherers. We're going to be in ketosis because food wasn't guaranteed. We're going to go long periods of time without eating. Obviously, our bodies are designed to survive, and it made sense that we had the capability of going long periods without eating, and our body could run off fat storage. I mean, we call it fat storage, but yet we're wondering why we're eating all this sugar and our body keeps storing this fat. It's like because fat isn't bad for you, and I almost had to rethink the way I looked at things because growing up in the diet nutrition world, I was getting the leanest cut of meat. I was completely disregarding sugar and carbs and what I was eating, and a lot of my inflammation and a lot of my joint pain went away after because I thought it was from like years of squatting and playing basketball, playing sports. It wasn't. It was caused by my diet. And so let's get into your story on how you end up, I guess, starting the Charlie Foundation.
Sure. Well, it goes back. I spent like the first 48 years of my life just trying to find things not to take seriously. That's pretty much what those movies are about. If trying to identify things in our lives that we take seriously that we really don't, it's not really worth it, like stupid movies and stuff like that. But then when our third child was born, Charlie, he had terrible epilepsy, really bad epilepsy. So he was, in a very short period of time, averaging as many as a dozen seizures a day. He was on a bunch of meds. I was at a point in my career where I was pretty successful. So I was indirectly linked to lots of people who donated big money to hospitals all over the United States. So as opposed to most people, we sort of got to skip to the head of the line to see the head of pediatric neurology at UCLA, Children's Hospital here in Los Angeles, Seattle Children's, Boston Children's, took Charlie to the best. And they were all in agreement about treatment options for Charlie. One was drugs, one was surgery. And if that didn't work, he was destined for a life of continued seizures and what they call progressive retardation. In just a second, seizures, I mean, I don't know what comes to most people's mind when they think of seizures. There are a variety of different kinds of seizures. There are drop seizures, and they're what classically are called grand mal or tonic-clonic seizures, when a person falls and stuff like that. Well, Charlie had every variety of seizure, and it's very painful. It includes where he would make these like otherworldly squeals. And I'm just going into this to explain how difficult that life can be for not just the kid, but for the whole family who's going through that experience. Charlie has two older siblings, and they were terrified by what was going on. They were scared. They didn't want to upset Nancy and me too much because they knew we had our hands full with trying to take care of Charlie. So they tended to bottle their emotions. Charlie's older brother, Joseph, years later wrote, how could I hate someone I love for having a disease he can't control? And I think that identifies the emotions of lots of siblings, of sick kids. So as time went on, I'm sorry?
I was going to say, how old were your two oldest compared to Charlie?
Yeah, Joseph was 7 and Jamie was 6.
Oh, wow.
When Charlie was born. So there was a significant difference, and they were used to having the run of the house.
Well, I was putting in perspective, like, were they at the age where they kind of understood what was going on? But that's really young. They really didn't get what was going on. And so much of and I'm sure you even felt guilty maybe as a parent because you had to put so much energy and emotional energy and physical energy into taking care of Charlie that I'm sure even at times you probably felt like you neglected the other kids, right? Maybe a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think that's common in families where there is a sick kid. I mean, by definition, you just have to spend more time with the sick kid. And the siblings have to deal with that one way or another. Even though you're aware of it, but I got to go to the hospital. He's in the hospital. So they get it, but it's confusing, and it's very hard for them, I think, to work through their feelings about what that's like and how to deal with it. And so, the only time in the years since we started the Charlie Foundation that we've veered off course from diet therapies in any direction is just to support siblings, because I think that's a untouched area in not just the world of epilepsy, in any family where there's a sick kid.
Yeah, that's and as a parent, once I became a parent, like hearing these stories, I constantly put myself in your shoes, and that's why I could see myself feeling guilty, because one child requires so much attention, and now, like you said, unfortunately, you have no option but to give that child the attention it needs, and feeling like you're neglecting the other ones.
Right.
And just, I knock on wood, I haven't been in many situations. My kids are young. My son just turned 5. My daughter's 3, and I haven't
Enjoy that.
What's that?
Enjoy that.
Yeah, no, I do. I take a lot of pictures. We have a small business, and I always joke around and say how I'm purposely stunting the growth of a small business for years because I want to spend as much time as I can with the kids. Like, to me, it's funny because my father's so different. Like, they were raised on a farm, and like they're of the generation where the father's purpose was just to kind of do the hard labor, pay the bills, and come home. I don't remember hugs or kisses or I love yous or any of that. And even on weekends when my dad wants to work weekends, because apparently when you're married for as long as he has been, you want to get out of the house as often as possible. But he, he wants to work weekends, and I'm like, oh no, my kids, my daughter has dance or my son has soccer, martial arts. He's like, oh, you can't get somebody else to go? I'm like, Dad, no, you don't understand. It's not a chore. I actually want to go. I enjoy seeing them improve. I enjoy when they do something well, them looking for me in the crowd to see if I noticed. So it's so different. But the one time my daughter she got hurt and we had to rush her to the hospital. She got her finger stuck in a door, and I remember that helplessness. And it happened not too long ago. It was probably like 6 months ago or around then. And I remember thinking about the Charlie Foundation. I remember thinking about your story. I remember thinking about other stories similar where you feel helpless, like you want to just consume their pain and make them pain free. And you're like, I wish I could go through it so you didn't have to.
Exactly.
And to go through that, like what you went through for so long, and not knowing that there's other options. And that's the thing. Like the really interesting part of your story is the fact that you're not somebody who lives in a third world country that didn't have the best doctors and research. You had access to great doctors, great what we say in what they say in the medical world are really intelligent people who know your best options. And nobody recommended this to you, but you ran into it yourself, which was I thank God that you did. But I mean, the anger you must have felt when you found out that like this could have ended so much earlier, so you want to get into that? How did you, so as this progressed, and obviously, and another question, I know you've said this in interviews and you said this today too, that they propose surgery. How would they fix it by surgery? Like what would they actually do?
Well, actually, there are two kind of known cures for epilepsy today. One is the ketogenic diet therapy, and the other is surgery. And basically, what they do is if they can find a focus in the brain where the seizure is starting, and if that focus isn't in a part of the brain like where memory is stored, they can surgically remove that focus, and people can be cured. Wow. So that's not as outrageous as it sounds. That is a viable technique to cure epilepsy. But where they can't find the focus, or if the focus is in a part of the brain where it's really indispensable, then that's no longer an option. So basically, what happened with me, is once we heard, we kind of ran out of drugs to try, and they did try a surgery, and the surgery failed. And basically what they tried to do is they tried to remove a cyst from the lower part of Charlie's brain, which was a stupid idea anyway. I mean, that's not where his seizures were emanating from anyway, but they went through it, and it turned out to be it was a nightmare, because what we were told it was a 45-minute procedure. And Nancy and I were in the waiting room for about 3.5 hours when somebody came up to the waiting room and said, there's been a complication, and he's having, man, I've told this story so many times over the years, but you can see it's still pretty close to home. They came up to talk to us, and they said, there's been a complication, and we have to give him morphine. So Charlie at the time was 17 months old. And so they had to wait for why'd they have to give him morphine? Was he in that bad pain? I mean, what's that about? Nobody explained that to us. That's just what happened. So eventually we got to see him in the recovery room, and he was all like swollen because he had this reaction to the morphine, and his face was all like red, and the surgery didn't help. In 2 days, the seizures came back. So at that point, we pretty much ran out of hope. And that's when this is pre-internet. I don't know if anybody remembers pre-internet, but this is 1993. And so when we were at UCLA seeing Charlie's primary pediatric neurologist, I started doing some research, not really to like try to find a cure. I mean, Charlie had had seizures in the arms of some of the most highly respected pediatric neurologists in the world, certainly in the United States. And but I was curious, how do kids like Charlie and the rest of the family make it through life with a kid who's that sick, who's not going to stop seizing, and who's, as I say, the term they used back then was progressive retardation. How do you watch your kid stop walking, stop talking, stop, being able to feed himself, all that kind of stuff? How do you get through life? That seemed pretty bleak. So while I was at the library, I started, and it was just the UCLA Medical Library. It was no big deal. I started looking up his diagnosis, which was Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and then I would look at right above in the index of the books, right above L is K, and I would see this thing, Ketogenic Diet. And eventually I turned to the page that said Ketogenic Diet. Holy cow, it was unbelievable. There was the diet, it described a diet that was developed at the Mayo Clinic in 1921. So we're coming on a 1 century anniversary of the ketogenic diet for kids with difficult to control seizures. And I was interested in listening to one of your podcasts last night. It was Dr. Jim Cowan. Is that the name? Or
Tom Cowan.
Tom Cowan.
Yes.
And you were talking about science and all this kind of stuff, and it was a fascinating interview. But what I found when I was doing my research at UCLA, one day, there were studies on the efficacy of the ketogenic diet for kids with epilepsy that were incredibly consistent. In other words, they took the same patient population, and these are from different hospitals, different doctors, different decades, for at that time up to 70 years, all coming up with amazingly similar results. Basically, a third of the kids who had bad seizures, who went on diet, had their seizures go away. Another third had a significant improvement, at least a 50% reduction in seizures, and for a third, the diet had no benefit. And it was like startling information to me. I felt like I couldn't believe it. But there it was in a bunch of medical texts. And the last one I came across was a study that was published in Epilepsy, which is the premier American epilepsy journal. And it was written by a guy named Dr. John Freeman from Johns Hopkins University. And it was published, it was hot off the presses. It was published in 1992, a year before Charlie got sick. So it was out there. And Dr. Freeman's study was on 58 consecutive kids who were as sick as Charlie, who he had put on a ketogenic diet. And of the 58 kids, 29% became seizure-free, and another 30% were significantly improved. Mind-boggling.
Wow.
So it's kind of interesting. So about the same time we came across this, Nancy came across a friend who knew an herbalist who worked out of a strip mall in Houston, Texas. And so, and he evidently had herbs that he could give kids who had bad seizures, and the herbs would help the seizures. So we went to Charlie's doctor at UCLA, Don Shields, and we said, okay, so look, we have these two alternatives. We were so desperate. We have these two alternatives. There's this diet that they're still doing at Johns Hopkins, which is supposed to help kids. And there's this herbalist who works out of a strip mall in Houston, Texas. What should we do? What should we do? And he said, I quote, flip a coin. I don't believe either will work. And um, and that was the last time we took his advice, because we did flip the coin, and it did come up herbalist in Houston, Texas. So we piled Charlie onto a plane and went to Houston, visited this herbalist, and he had some kind of herbs and they didn't work. So finally, I called Dr. Freeman, the guy from Johns Hopkins, who wrote the study that I was talking about earlier. And I explained what was going on. And he said, send Charlie's records. And we did. And then he said, well, I think you should bring Charlie to Johns Hopkins, where he still had access to a dietitian who had been working with the ketogenic diet during its heyday in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, stuff like that. And we'll start Charlie on the ketogenic diet. So we did. We flew back to Hopkins. We started on the diet. And within 2 days, at the time, Charlie was averaging like 20 seizures a day. And he was on 4 anti-epileptic medicines. And within 2 days, his seizures stopped. Within a month, he was off all of his medicines. And he wound up being on the ketogenic diet for 5 years. Today, Charlie's going to be 28 next week. He's never had another seizure. He's never taken another anti-epileptic drug. He eats whatever he wants. And he's gone on he's a teacher. He boxes, he plays piano. He's a happy kid. And so that's the end of his story. But that was sort of the beginning of our story. Obviously, we were relieved and gratified, but you're right. A lot of me was angry because 99% of what happened to Charlie didn't have to happen to Charlie. And then I took a look around, and there's a world epilepsy population of over 60 million people. And most of those people start having their seizures as children, and yet just a tiny, tiny fraction of 1% ever hear about a ketogenic diet or have access to someone who can help them with a ketogenic diet.
Did he have any, because of obviously, I heard stories, or you tell stories about, like, I mean, some days he could have up to like 100 seizures a day. Right. Was there any long-term damage that you're aware of because
Yes.
of all those years of having such violent seizures?
Yeah, well, Charlie has some autism today, and I don't know. He functions normally, lives independently, but there is some autism going on. Whether of all, I've always thought about it would be nice to write an English doctor English dictionary, because there are a lot of words that doctors use that I wouldn't. I would change if I had any input. And one of those is comorbid. If you have two conditions that tend to overlap, those are comorbid conditions. I don't know. It seems to me it's bad enough that you got two things going on. They could pick a kinder word. Anyway, so it's not infrequent when epilepsy and autism are comorbid conditions. But I will always wonder what would have happened because the first 2 years of brain development are the most important years, and Charlie's brain was pretty much put on hold for the second year of his brain development. And I will always wonder, in the back of my mind, it will be the question, what would have happened if Charlie had been using the ketogenic diet at an appropriate time, not waiting for all those seizures, in drugs, in surgery? How did that affect him? Nobody has the answer to that, but that's part of what keeps me motivated.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is when you have newborns is that they emphasize how important DHA and all the fats are, and then as you get older, like, I remember growing up with the food pyramid. It was like the most ridiculous thing ever. I mean, it was just grains and rice and bread, like things that have no nutritional value should be the majority of what I consume throughout the day. All that stuff causes inflammation, arthritis. I mean, as you know, with Dr. Thomas Seyfried's work, with how glucose, and I mean, they've known for 100 years that glucose can feed cancer cells. It's an energy source of cancer cells. So there's that impact on your body. I mean, there's so, the thing about science is sometimes how unscientific it is. And there's a guest that I have on my show for years now, really great, really intelligent guy, did a short documentary called The Crisis of Science, and he went through like all these studies that like some people, like one guy who purposely did a fake study and got it published just to prove the point that you can find any outcome, that it's very easy to find the outcomes you want, to get it published and get some attention. I think it was something about like how you can lose weight or lower cholesterol or something like that eating chocolate or something like that. And it was like, yeah, if you pick and cherry pick the information and what information you're disregarding and whatnot, you can get something that looks like some groundbreaking study that has flaws in it. And that's why I'm a big fan of Gary Taubes, because Gary Taubes is one of those guys that he was, he critiqued science, and then, his story is somebody told him, hey, if you think that there's some bad science in this field, wait till you go into the world of nutrition. And then he found out that, all this science that was telling us not to eat fats and disregard sugar, don't worry about sugar, it's not bad for you, was all based on nonsense and bad science, and which makes sense, because you figure, if you just look at historically, fruits weren't, I don't think they were as sweet as they were today. If you look at like the original banana, it was a lot of seeds, and I guess I forget how much sugar was in it, but it wasn't as much as one today. It's basically dessert now, and it was seasonable. You couldn't get it all year round. So now we can have fruit all year round. We can have everything we buy, from breads to every drink has some sugar. And even with the keto diet, because it's gotten so popular, you have to be intelligent when buying stuff that says it's keto friendly, because you'll still buy stuff that says it's keto friendly, but yet it has like soybean oil or some other like bad ingredient that's not good for you, or sucralose, which isn't good for you. So it's like, well, is it keto friendly? Yes, but is it necessarily good for you? No. So even though you do see products out there now increase that say, oh, the keto friendly. I'm glad it's getting more popular, but there's always some people who look at this and say, cha-ching, hey, this fad is growing. Let's take advantage of it. Let's put out stuff that says keto friendly. It might not necessarily be healthy, and just to kind of take advantage of people. But what was your diet like prior to the ketogenic diet? Do you guys feel like as a family you ate pretty good, or how did you eat?
So our kids, I just reflecting on, I don't know whether you've covered the whole story of Ansel Keys, the Harvard-based doctor who really came up with the food pyramid and the flawed science on which that was based. I think that affected from the time I was a kid, pretty much till recently. I think that affected the way we all ate, with carbs at the bottom of most, popular stuff to eat. And that's all been, the flawed science has been exposed, but as somebody said, it's like turning the Titanic to get nutrition in America to change, and globally, but specifically in America. I'm a huge fan of Gary Taubes, by the way. And Gary is one of the guys who asks the question, well, how do those physicians, I'm sort of paraphrasing him, how do those physicians look their cardiologists, et cetera, look their patients in the eyes and say, geez, I'm sorry, I've been recommending the wrong diet, and I may have killed some of your neighbors, and I might be killing you, but accept my apologies. That's a rough. Anyway, so that was Gary's recent question. I think we fed our family, however families were fed. Healthy in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s. But I remember spray butter. Do you remember spray
Yeah.
butter? The stuff because you weren't supposed to have any fat, so we ate all that stuff. But uh, um, but then when Charlie got sick, and we started paying attention to the ketogenic diet, that altered my family's diet dramatically. And because we started paying some attention to the research and paying attention to the back then myths that they would use to dispel families from using a ketogenic diet for epilepsy or a medical disorder. And so that influenced us a lot. Interestingly, today, 27 years later, Nancy and our two older kids and I are all on a ketogenic diet. And the only member of our family who's not is Charlie. he, he goes around eating whatever he wants. And and the irony of that, of course, is that I think that in '93, when he started the diet, he was one of maybe just a handful, maybe not more than a dozen people in the world who are on a ketogenic diet for any reason. And now it's become very, very popular. And, I'm sure my next door neighbors are on some version of the diet. The other fact that is worth addressing is that, yeah, it's been great that there's been this explosion of interest in a ketogenic diet, but along with that has come a great deal of misinformation. And so if you're really going to use a ketogenic diet for a medical purpose, a brain tumor, epilepsy, autism, any of a number of neurological disorders, you can't be cavalier with it. And you need to work with a trained nutritionist who can hold your hand through the process.
Yeah, it's well, I think that's the other thing that people don't realize, that even if you're not on it all the time, or if you're not in ketosis all the time, because I think sometimes people can get pretty obsessed with like getting in ketosis. I know I was like, getting those pee strips, and I'm constantly checking. I'm like, am I in ketosis? And after a while, you actually sensed it, you felt it. Like before I checked, I could tell. I'm like, I'm not hungry, my energy is sustained, and cognitively, I feel sharp. And which kind of makes sense, because you figure when you're hunting food and you didn't eat for a while, being able to be sharp and so you can survive and get food was important. So this is thousands and thousands of years of us being able to survive in ketosis. But you get benefits from ketosis even if you're not in it all the time. And I think you see a lot of people like myself, for example. I've been doing it for so long that if I have, I don't call them cheat days, I call them reward days. Sometimes we'll do, Sunday night pizza and movie with the kids and the family, and I that's like my soft spot is pizza. So I'm so good during the whole week that I'm like, you know what, this is a reward day. I earned it. I was disciplined. Let me earn this. And for the most part, within 24 hours, I'm back in ketosis. I'm good. I don't really have any long-term effects. I don't really feel that crappy when I eating bad one night. And so you can kind of hop in and hop. Your body will learn to transition, because I know a lot, what they call the keto flu, which is basically just, we consume so much glucose that I think some people, it takes longer for them to teach their body how to burn fats again. I tell people, I'm like, your body's a hybrid car. It can run off fats or it can run off, glucose. I'm like, if you only give it glucose, it's just going to store the fat, so, but it is hard, because when you've been told the same thing, it's like that quote, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. Well, we've been tricked with nutrition. So now it's like telling somebody that, hey, you know how you've been using margarine because butter's supposed to be bad for you, and you know how you've been eating lean pieces of meat and because fat's supposed to be bad. All that is nonsense. It's like people look at you like you're crazy. You're like, wait, my whole life I've been told that the sky is blue, and now you're telling me it's purple. It's like, it's just, it's hard to your people's first reaction is to disbelief. They don't want to believe it. It's like telling them that they've been living in the Matrix. You gave them the
Right.
the red pill. So it is hard to kind of break through that. So a lot of like,
Just say,
yeah,
let me
yeah.
just go back to this one thing. If you're on a ketogenic diet to feel good or for general health, weight loss, that's slightly different than if you're on it for a medical reason. And I think it's important to underline that because I know of lots of cases, unfortunately, over the years where a kid was on the diet for epilepsy and he or she slipped, cheated, a brownie. That can be it. Like, and they slip out of ketosis and have a seizure, and I know of cases where it's been fatal. So if you're on, yeah. So that's why I think it's important that that day off thing doesn't exist. Not even a meal, not even a snack off exists if you're on the diet for, a genuine medical purpose.
So when Charlie was little, what exactly? Because I mean, as a parent, I know how hard it is to get kids to eat what they should be eating. Did you have to get creative? How did you get him to consume so much fat? And what type of fats were you giving him?
Well, it was he wasn't a good eater to begin with, and back in those days there was no food packaging, so we were kind of playing a lot of it by ear and trying to figure out what was appropriate, and it would take him sometimes up to an hour to eat a meal, and he had to eat everything, no more, no less, but had to eat everything to the gram for 5 years. So it got to be it was very difficult for Nancy in particular. She would go to health food stores to try to find anything with taste that didn't have sugar in it. And at some point during the whole journey, I think her line was, she'd finished feeding him one meal, and her line was, "Oh, great, only 1,752 to go." So it was difficult, but again, next to what he had been through, his development came back. He became a happy kid again. He could smile and all that. So compared to what he had been through, those years on the diet were pretty much a walk on the beach.
I'm curious if the reason why he's not doing it anymore was because it did take the fun out of doing it. Because I mean, you could, diet became such so important in his life. And like you said, when you're counting everything and you're keeping track of everything, it probably got to the point where, and how did he figure out that because that leads to another thing I'm curious about. How did he figure out that he could get off it and not have the seizures again? Like, did he just slowly start increasing his carbs or experimenting with different foods to see if he could live healthy while, I guess, expanding his horizons with foods?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's kind of interesting. What our experience with the diet was, and the lore of the diet back then, and I think pretty much today, the diet for epilepsy is if a kid is on the diet for 2 years and does as well as Charlie has, in other words, no seizures, no drugs, then they wean the child off the diet. But what happened with us after 2 years is when we weaned him off the diet, his seizures came back. And there was a big, oh my God, what are we going to do now kind of thing. And we called Dr. Freeman at Johns Hopkins, and we said, the seizures are back. And he said, well, you got a couple choices. You can give him drugs, you can do nothing, or put him back on the diet. So we put him back on the diet, and just as instantly, or as the diet worked the first time, it worked the second time. Away went the seizures, and this time we stayed on like 2.5 more years, and then weaned him off, and after that, he's been cured. But it's interesting because there was clearly, for the naysayers, there was clearly a cause and effect between Charlie going on a ketogenic diet and his seizures disappearing.
Yeah, because there are people who are going to say maybe it's coincidental, maybe it's So yeah, so the fact that it happened twice is huge, and so this obviously sparked the motivation to start the Charlie Foundation. There's also a movie that you came out with about your experience with Charlie. So what is the Charlie Foundation? What was your purpose? What was your motivation?
Well, the motivation was just the awareness that there were literally millions of families who were suffering exactly as ours had unnecessarily. Millions. And that exists today too, because this knowledge is not made accessible. So in our own little way, we thought we've got to do anything we can to let other people who are walking in our shoes know there's an alternative to what's going on now, drugs, surgeries, and seizures. And so we just tried, and it's kind of interesting. I went to, as it all sort of settled in, I went to Dr. Freeman at Hopkins, and I said, why was it up to me to find out about this diet? Why didn't any of these world-class doctors, neurologists, specialists in this field who dedicated their lives to helping kids like Charlie, why didn't they say anything to us? And what he said, and over the years, this has only become more impactful for me. What he says is the ketogenic diet will never become popular if you go through traditional routes of medical education to get the knowledge to the people who could benefit. In other words, publications, medical meetings, books, that ain't going to do the job. What you need to do is somehow circumvent the medical and scientific world and get the information directly to the people who could benefit. Well, that was interesting. And that, the more you think, and he was true, he was right. And so, I was in the movie business, so I figured, well, here's what I'll do. I'm going to make a video about the ketogenic diet. So I went back with a film crew for about a week. We went back to Hopkins and we filmed some kids starting on the diet and filmed a couple other parents whose kids were on the diet. And we put together this video. And Meryl Streep, who is a friend whose older kids went to school with our older kids and had seen Charlie be sick and seen him get so miraculously better, agreed to narrate this video. And so we created this introduction to the ketogenic diet video. But the interesting thing was then, as we were doing that, one of the guys who worked on the film crew when we were filming at Hopkins also worked for Dateline NBC. And when he went back to his Dateline, they said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm working on this amazing dietary cure for epilepsy." And they said, gosh, and they called me up, and Dateline came and did a segment on Charlie and the ketogenic diet and what had happened. And that was that was aired in 1994. And that was a blam, explosion, because all of a sudden, millions of people who could benefit were seeing this. And, if you have a sick kid, everybody's in touch with every relative, every friend, to find any tidbit of information. And here was this segment, and it was well done. They interviewed Charlie's doctor at UCLA, who tried to dance about why he never recommended the diet for us. They interviewed Dr. Freeman. It was a well done segment, and that kind of opened the dam. And then we started to hear from other people who had experiences like Charlie. In other words, the ketogenic diet for epilepsy has been around since 1921. So there have been lots and lots, tens of thousands of people who had seizures as kids, were put on the diet, were cured, and went on to healthy, normal lives. And we started to hear from some of those people. And the most dramatic story that I think, and we get letters, not emails, letters. And the most dramatic story was from a mom who lived outside of Chicago, whose son had bad epilepsy, and her family went broke from the medical bills. And eventually, he was in a hospital in Chicago, and she had heard about the diet. She tried to get him out of the hospital. She tried to kidnap him out of the hospital and get him to Johns Hopkins to try the diet. And so I got in touch with her, and she gave us permission to write her story. And we made her story into a TV movie that Meryl Streep again starred in, called First Do No Harm. And that aired in 1997, I think, 97 or 98. But in the end of that boy's story was that he was cured also. So Dr. Freeman is absolutely correct. The biggest impact we've had, and we've been involved in setting up lots of global scientific medical symposia over the years, but the greatest impact we've had was circumventing the medical community and going right to the people who could benefit.
Now, the only concern about that, right, is that because they're not. We have this issue where we don't get the advice from somebody who looks like a doctor or has some diploma on the wall. We don't. Some people have a harder time believing it. Like they assume that if this was a realistic option, then why isn't my doctor telling me about it? And so bypassing the medical field is a good thing, but in a way, there are people out there too that, like, I've had conversations with people, and they look at me like, well, that all makes sense, but why is my doctor telling me about this? Or why, and it's just like, one thing, I mean, doctors don't know anything about nutrition for the most part. I've had quite a few doctors on my show, and they all tell you, they barely even scratch the surface on nutrition. And then, they learn some information, and they just go, and it's basically pharmaceutical based. I don't know where I was reading this recently about how the ketogenic diet was used for seizures, and one of the reasons why they stopped was because they had these prescription drugs that basically took its position. It took that role, and then they're like, well, we don't need to focus on the ketogenic diet anymore. Now we can just prescribe a pill, which makes people money. There's no money in saying, hey, change the way you eat, and you can possibly stop these seizures or prevent this illness. So I think, do you see a lot of that, a lot of like some of the reason why it's not a focus, why it's not, because I mean, obviously the success rate, even if you argue, what the success rate is, I mean, there's plenty of treatments that doctors will recommend to you that the success rate is much less. Chemo and radiation, I mean, radiation causes cancer, and yet you're using it to kill cancer. And we know that other types of cancers, your increase the chances of getting other types of cancer after chemo. But that's something that they're completely mainstream, and it's completely acceptable to recommend to people. But yet, these other things seem like they're on the fringe, which to me is silly. So have you seen any pushback, or what's your thoughts on, like, the pharmaceutical industry maybe having a hand in why something like the keto diet isn't, I guess, suggested, or even in some cases, doctors aren't even aware of it?
Right. So I've been obsessed with that very question for many, many years now. I think there are lots of forces that don't work in favor of the ketogenic diet. First of all, you're absolutely correct. I have a friend, a guy named Tom Minahan, who's an emergency room doctor, whose daughter Mallory had very bad epilepsy, and he went through all the routines of drugs and stuff until he found the ketogenic diet for her. And I think she's like 600 days seizure free now. And as part of his job as an emergency room doctor, what Tom does is travels the United States and lectures other emergency room doctors about emergency room protocols and stuff. And as a result of what happened with Mallory and her success with the diet, at the end of his lecture, and I've been to several of his lectures, he'll talk to like 100 doctors at a time. At the end of his lecture, he'll add 2 questions. He'll say, how many of you doctors have ever heard of a ketogenic diet? And his guesstimate, and what I saw, was maybe 3 to 5% of the people in the audience will raise their hand. Then his follow-up question will be, so of 3 to 5% of you who have heard of a ketogenic diet, how many of you know it can be a cure for epilepsy? No one has ever known that, ever. So you're right. Nutrition and diet therapies are just not taught in medical school and doctors' training. Anybody can just try their own randomized. Next time you see a doctor, ask them, how much time did you spend in med school learning about nutrition and diet therapy? And they'll all say virtually none. And then there are other forces other than this chasm between existing science and people who could benefit the medical community. There are other forces at work too. Obviously, there's the pharmaceutical community, which makes billions and billions every year off of anti-epileptic drugs. There's the medical device community, which makes additional billions off of, VNS and all sorts of implants. There's the American Heart Association, which to this day disseminates all sorts of faulty information based on flawed science that that would talk a person out of a ketogenic diet. There are insurance companies which make it very difficult to get reimbursement for a nutritionist, a trained nutritionist, to work with somebody who's on a ketogenic diet. The insurance companies haven't caved to being helpful in that respect. And there are hospital systems which profit hugely off of these procedures and tests and devices that make no money off diet therapy. And I'll just add one more to that, is one of the problems is, what they always come up with, is a lack of research. Well, guess who pays for the research? The drug companies pay for the research. So how do you suppose that research is going to come out? So I think there are many forces at work other than good health in our healthcare system that have prohibited the ketogenic diet or impeded the ketogenic diet from being mainstream therapy.
Now, in regards to keto supplements, do you think, have you guys done research on that and getting any, I guess, because people will use ketone supplements like a keto ester, powder to kind of get your ketones in your system. There's benefits in regards to like energy and cognitive function and curving your appetite, but in regards to like medical issues, would it help? Would it help somebody if they're struggling to get in ketosis taking a supplement? Have you guys looked into that at all?
Yeah, and I know that we've worked some with Dominic D'Agostino, who I know you've talked with, who's big into that, and I think that's a burgeoning field. I'm not. I don't know enough to have an opinion.
Yeah. And so the Charlie Foundation, it's not, you don't just, I guess, do research in regards to the ketogenic diet and people and seizures and that type of stuff. You kind of look at all medical benefits, all types of medical benefits and health benefits of the ketogenic diet. Has there been anything that really stuck out that you were surprised that it can actually, like, what's some of the other benefits you can get from it, outside of maybe dealing with some type of seizures and stuff like that?
It's been an incredible, and we're just sitting there. This has all happened during the last 25 years and stuff, but we're just sitting on the side of the road and kind of watching this happen. But the whole notion of metabolic therapies for a number of disorders have come on the scene now. I know you talked to Tom Seyfried and Dom D'Agostino about brain cancer, in particular, these glioblastomas, which are in essence a death sentence. And there is preliminary evidence that the diet can be very helpful, at least in mitigating the adverse effects of the chemo and radiation. And there's very good evidence that it can actually help shrink the tumor. I was, and part of what keeps me passionate about what I'm doing is, as these new fields emerge, obviously there isn't 100 years of research, but for somebody who gets that diagnosis of a glioblastoma, you don't have time to sit around and wait for the first randomized controlled study on the diet for glioblastoma. And so we have to kind of figure risk benefit and stuff. Well, the risk is virtually minimal and the benefit can be huge. I was at Dom and some other people run a metabolic health summit in California every year. And I was there a couple weeks ago. And they actually kind of recognized the Charlie Foundation, and they recognized the Charlie Foundation in the name of a guy named David Shavak, who passed away. And David Shavak had died from a brain tumor, from glioblastoma. And David's story, I didn't know who he was, so I talked to some friends of his, and just to learn who he was. And his story was that bright guy, educated guy, healthy guy, and he, in 2015, got this brain tumor. And he went to traditional Western medicine approaches. So they gave him chemo, they gave him radiation. He had 5 brain surgeries, and he wasn't doing well. And then his sister, who was not a medical professional, heard about the ketogenic diet for glioblastoma and recommended it. And the doctor at Cedars-Sinai here in Los Angeles, where he was being treated, said, okay, you can try this diet. And for about a year, David improved. He learned how to read again. He got his balance back. He took control of his medical destiny, and he thrived for about a year until the tumor finally came back, and he died in 2018. Well, the moral of the point is there was tons of science out there. There was tons of information out there that said from the day that David got that first diagnosis, he should have been on a ketogenic diet. And there wasn't the randomized controlled study. Got it. But that's and I think that's what's going on today in America, is because that there is not sufficient science in place, that the most logical choice are being prohibited. And I think that's a big problem. And so I hope that, at the Charlie Foundation anyway, we can try to shed some light on that so people can make informed joint decisions with their physicians. Again, we're not, and even when I was saying you got to circumvent the medical community, I mean, I think you do for knowledge, but then if you have a real medical condition, you have to make decisions in conjunction with your physician, not go off, on your own.
Yeah, I guess the only concern about that is sometimes your physician, if they're not familiar with it, their first reaction is to push back and say, "Oh, you shouldn't do it," and so it's hard because it's like in a way it's like they are supposed to look after you, and that's who you're supposed to go to deal with your health issues per se, but doing your own research a lot of times is your best bet. And I mean, intelligence is the ability to filter out the stuff that doesn't make sense and consume the stuff that makes sense. And as adults, we shouldn't put all our faith into somebody because they have a diploma. We should be able to ask questions, and but science has become very dogmatic. It's one of those things where like people look at doctors almost like they're priests. Like whatever they say, it's holy. Don't question what they say, even if it makes no sense. And to me, it's like you have to ask questions. You have to do your research. Don't just listen to somebody, and they might be right, and they might give you good information. But if you do your research, you'll probably see that too, if it is. But it is a little scary because nobody wants
Well,
to. Yeah.
I'm sorry, at first it's a little scary, but then ultimately, my experience is that it's empowering because you can take control of your medical destiny. And at first, I mean, I remember when Charlie was sick, you just, sure, fix him. Well, that didn't work. So, at the end of the day, the fact that we took control of fixing him was empowering, and it's benefited the rest of my life and the rest of my family's life. And because we went through this learning curve of just handing off our problems to these folks, as opposed to educating ourselves and participating in the process. And that's, at the end of the day, I think we all need to go through that. And at the end of the day, it can. Do we have time for one more quick one?
Yeah, we keep.
So after Charlie was cured by the diet, in 2002, I got a really bad case of leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia. And after we had been through the learning curve with Charlie, and I went to the first doctor, and there was something, and I was given, they told me I had a 50% chance of surviving 2 years. This was in 2002. And I went to the first doctor, and something about this guy, it's like he was too busy to like really fill me in on how I was going to die and stuff like that. I just didn't like him and stuff like that. But I'd been through this learning curve, and I'd seen doctors give us bad advice for Charlie. And so I was quick. Nancy and I kind of both came to this thing. Let's get out of here. I got to find a different cancer doctor. And at the end of the day, it was a good thing to do. At the end of the day, that the doctor who we left wasn't going to give me the right treatment. He was going to, in the end of the day, and I'm not sure I would have survived it. And at the end of the day, we wound up at City of Hope, which was a wonderful hospital, and they gave me my sister's stem cells. So in 2002, I was A positive male blood. Today, I'm O positive female blood. It's crazy, but that's the truth. So I think part of what saved my life back then was this, having gone through this learning curve with what happened to Charlie, so that I was, my antennae were more tuned into this guy, to this doctor, and his attitude and his fuzziness of answers and all sorts of stuff. And so we hopped on to the next doctor very quickly.
Well, I think that is a problem too, because you see people like Dr. Chris Kresher, and they talk about like functional medicine doctors, how they actually take the time to figure out what you're eating, what your lifestyle is. Like most doctors that people see, it's like in and out. They charge your insurance, they give you a pill, and see ya. It's just like they're just trying to get in as many people as possible. It's like the difference between going to like a chain restaurant where they just want to flip tables, and then a mom and pop place where you end up spending all day there drinking wine, and they don't care about that. It's because they're there about the experience, and they care about people and whatnot. And and the thing is, our whole medical field, I mean, I think of it almost like they're police officers, right? They come and they try to, it's like after the damage is already done, they just kind of put a Band-Aid on it. It's like they don't get to the root cause of the issue. They don't get to, it's symptom management. If you have arthritis, I think Chris Kresser is the one who said the metaphor of like, it's like having a rock in your shoe and then giving you a painkiller for the pain instead of telling you to get the rock out of your shoe. It's like they don't get to the root cause of the issue. It's like it's all like, what's your symptom? Okay, here's a pill for that symptom. It's like, but well, what's causing that symptom? It's like, violence because of poverty, right? So it's like, instead of fixing poverty, we just keep locking them up. Oh, let's fix the issue by locking up the violent people. But we never ask, like, why are they violent? Is it because they have no options? Because they have bad schools? Maybe they have no jobs? Like, that's kind of the same thing. It's the same way we look at people. It's like, we're not getting to the root cause of the issue. We're just putting a Band-Aid on the symptom, or trying to fix the symptom. So that's a huge issue. And the thing about nutrition, because I do so many different topics, because I'm such a curious person, and I'm always going from one thing to, I just had John Barber on,
Yes, sir.
yeah, did you see that? Yeah, he's what a interesting guy he is. And we did a JFK, and we talked about some personal stories, but some of the stuff that motivates me the most is diet and nutrition shows, because of the fact that somebody can listen to, the John Barber conversation, maybe take something with them after the show, and maybe improve their life. But these type of shows, I know there's people out there who can improve, like, the everything from pain to cognitive ability to your mood to energy levels, which energy levels, I mean, is everything. I mean, I'm in a way better mood when I have energy than when I'm tired and weak and sluggish, And so the ability for people to like, these diet and nutrition shows to me are so important, because I know there's people listening that are eating incorrectly, who can really just get more out of life if they just change the way they eat. And that's why I think it's so important. And these conversations, I mean, it's been an honor to have you on, because what you're doing is amazing. And in my small little way, I'm trying to do the same thing, of just trying to get this information out there, trying to create my own ripple effect of sharing interesting conversation. That's why I don't have sponsorships. I don't want anybody to think I'm trying to sell keto supplements, or I'm trying to, it's like, no, it's the reason why when people do a diet, they seem very excited to try to get you on it, is because I know how it helped my life, and I want it to help you. Like, it's like, I want to share some information that could also help you, and I know sometimes diet and nutrition can be very cultish. It's like, come join my cult. I've joined, it's like, and it seems like similar to religion. It's like, you get very obsessive with, like, your way of thinking, but I'm not married to any idea. I just did the carnivore diet for it's supposed to be 2 weeks I was going to do it for, and I end up cheating one day, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do it one more week, and I end up doing it 3 weeks, just because I was curious. I was curious. I've had Dr. Sean Baker on. I was curious about this idea of, like, this elimination diet, where it can it's not so much that red meat is the cure to everything, but it's more about there's other things you're eating that could cause some digestive discomfort or some inflammation or whatever it may be. And because you're eliminating all that, and people like Dr. Jordan Peterson, who have no horse in the race, he's not into diet and nutrition at all. He had a history of autoimmune disease, and his daughter had a history of all these medical issues, and doing the carnivore diet was, basically cured him of all that stuff. So I think, that saying, that quote that Dominic D'Agostino showed at the end of his TED Talk, where he said, let medicine be thy food and food be thy medicine, is really, really, really important, because your best defense is your immune system. It's your body. If you keep that healthy, it's really, really important. So, yeah, and I'm sure that's a huge motivation of yourself, seeing all these people that you see it change their lives. I mean, your son's story is amazing, and now to be able to help change other families' lives, it's just I'm sure it's very gratifying.
It is very gratifying, and I do believe that as we do, it's much more. I feel much better if I change my exercise schedule or what I'm going to eat to feel better than going to the pharmacy and filling a prescription. That just feels better to me. And part of the reason is I'm taking control of my health. It's me doing it. And I know empowering is a cliche word, and I keep trying to think of something better that's going to have to do for now, because that's one of the huge benefits of paying attention to to your diet and to your exercise and to your lifestyle is that you take control. You are empowered by taking control of your life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you've been on the ketogenic diet for quite a few years now, or and what your personal benefits have you got out of it? In regards to cognitive ability, maybe some arthritis you had. Did you see any real benefits in your health?
I just think I feel better, and it could be I just now, because of this journey, I understand the downside of eating processed foods and eating sugar and all that. So maybe it's just my head. I feel better because I know I'm eating well, So, but I think my stamina is good for an old guy. I kind of, I think I'm right up there with Joe Biden in not having too many mental lapses. So, I feel things are, I feel healthier, and I'm sure Nancy and Joseph and Jamie, our kids, would say the same thing. They feel more fit, they can exercise, they have more energy, all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think the elimination, I mean, the research on how bad sugar is for you is crazy. I mean, what was that 1970s book, Pure, White, and Deadly, I think was one. There's a great documentary that came out some years ago called Sugar Coated. You can just see all the research is there. Like, we know how dangerous sugar is, and how a lot of our health issues, the root cause is most likely linked to sugar in many cases.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance, there's a guy named David Diamond. Do you know him?
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, if you get a chance to look him up, he's a whiz on this. He's a scientist and deeply into the flawed science of the American diet, and very articulate about it. A lot about Ansel Keys and how he set us in the wrong direction. David, I'll send you his email because you'd love
awesome.
to talk to him.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of Gary Taubes, is because same thing. He wasn't even in the realm of nutrition. He was just critiquing science, and when he ran into this, and it's amazing how much backlash he got. He had that debate on Joe Rogan's show, which I felt like didn't really do him any favors, because the problem with debates is that a lot of times it's who's a better debater. It's not who's making better points. And I think that's one of the problems with that. But that's why on my show I try to show that I'll have people on. I've had libertarians on. I just had Professor Richard Wolff, who's a Marxist, and a socialist. And to me, it's really important to kind of just don't be married to any ideas, take in all the information, and then see what makes sense, and that's all I ask, is people to be open-minded and stuff. And the nice thing about podcasts is that we still have the ability to do this. This is a passion project. It's not my full-time job. It's I don't make any money off this. I make a little bit of money off Patreon that barely covers the bandwidth and storage and stuff like that. But to me, it's way more important to get this information out there. And, I tell my listeners it's all open source for that reason. I'm like, you know what? Post it wherever you want. I don't care. I'm like, I'm not making money off it. So just post it. Post it anywhere. I'm like, because somebody might run into a conversation that could change their lives. And to me, that's really important. That's way more important than trying to get all the bandwidth to my website or to my YouTube channel or whatnot. So what's new with the Charlie Foundation? You have anything coming up that people should know about or look out for? Do you have the Charlie Foundation website? What type of information is on there if people want to get more information?
Right. I think where we fit in the community, and we talked about this a little earlier, there is as opposed to some areas where there is insufficient science. Today, there is plenty of science that exists that the ketogenic diet could be helpful for a number of conditions, including epilepsy. But there is this gap between the reality, the science, the published science and what your doctor will tell you. Sorry, that's just the way it is. So what we tried to do is fill that chasm with knowledge. And we, like you, have no sponsorship, so that the information that we put out there is totally objective. And we try to fill the gap between what is a ketogenic diet, how do you do it, how do you make what a ketogenic diet meals look like, where are the hospitals globally where you can get help doing a ketogenic diet, how do you calculate ketogenically balanced meals, and just try to fill that void that you're not getting from your physician in most cases. And so there's lots of information. We have tons of interviews with world famous scientists and neurologists addressing when to start a ketogenic diet, how to do a ketogenic diet, all YouTube stuff, including Dom and Seafried and stuff too. So, but that seems to be the niche where we fit best, filling the gap between science and the real world. And yes, there's got to be more science. Yeah, I get it. But we have facilitated 3 global meetings of scientists over the years, and a bunch of other meetings to get scientists together. But I feel that we're most effective when we try to fill the gap between science and the real world. So people can get information and, help control their medical destinies.
Have you? I know the movie you did in the past was in the '90s. That was before the ketogenic diet really became a household name. I mean, even when I started, most people didn't know what it was, and now it's like a household name. Have you thought about maybe doing something like that, doing another film, maybe doing something now that there's so much attention on it, people know the term? Have you thought about doing a doc? Because I'm not sure there's a real good documentary or anything like that. If you're trying to say like, hey, here, watch this documentary, it kind of will give you an outline of what the keto diet is and its health benefits and stuff. I'm not aware of anything. Have you thought about doing anything like that?
Yeah, there was a documentary recently called Fat. I'm going to forget the name of the guy that's sort of on the right track, and so but yeah, and I would love to. It's kind of finding the right handle and something that will keep moving for 90 minutes and be interesting enough. Actually, where you're right, the movie that I made in the 70s, in the 90s, was called First Do No Harm. And that did have a tremendous impact on ketogenic diet awareness. And so believe it or not, is one of the things I'm trying to do is get in touch. There are shows, I'm going to lose all my credibility now. Just go, nah. There are medical shows on TV, which are fiction, like The Good Doctor and stuff like that, and The Resident. And I'm trying very hard to get a segment on them for where a kid is treated with a ketogenic diet, because I believe that's where we could make huge impact. If they treat the diet fairly and objectively, it's not, without risks, but the risks are minuscule next to the potential benefit. But if it's treated on one of those, I think that would be a step in the right direction too. Because public awareness, if you're sitting at home with a kid who's sick, or if you have a brain tumor, or if you have type 2 diabetes, and you find out, holy cow, I can change what I eat and I can be better. Doctors get, their doors shoved open, like, really? I can do this? How come you didn't tell me? And I want to try this. And that by increasing public awareness, I think you and I can do a lot of good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes through entertainment, I think that's why comedians George Carlin, Bill Hicks. I mean, they can say things that are kind of, share their personal political philosophies and not offend as many people because it is entertainment. And I think that if you're trying to get the diet people to, if you say, hey, I want to talk to you about diet and nutrition, it's like, I'm all set. But if you put it, like you said, if it's in the storyline, of a show that they like,
Yeah.
it might be a way of bypassing that first offense, so it's, yeah, it's probably a good idea. You see it with music and all types of stuff, people will be, exposed to. I mean, I grew up listening to like 1 Minute Silence and Rage Against the Machine and bands that had these political meanings. 1 Minute Silence was from like Northern Ireland. And I didn't know anything growing up about what was going on there, and the IRA and all this stuff and the terrorist attacks, and then I'm like, what are these guys singing about? And then all of a sudden I'm looking up some stuff, and so it's yeah, I mean, it's a great way of getting people to pay attention to something that they might not necessarily go looking for. So yeah, I mean, I think the more the better. I don't know if you ever watched the Perfect Human Diet. CJ Hunt did the documentary. It's probably one of the better I think it's one of the better documentaries on diet and nutrition, because he had a bunch of medical issues, and then he basically wanted to do a documentary during his process of trying to figure out what's the perfect human diet. And what he didn't just talk to nutritionists, but he talked to anthropologists, historians. He did, kind of went a little different route than most films about diet and nutrition, and really figured out, okay, what did we used to eat? How did we eat? He talked to farmers, and they in their book, I forget what it's called, the book that tells you what to feed animals. It actually told you how to make them fatter, was increasing carbs and all this stuff, and so it's like it's a one of the better documentaries also out there. But it is one of those things where there's always the danger of, like, every documentary people will say, oh, well, they're cherry picking, or it's dogma because they're vegans or they're vegetarian, and this and that. And you see a lot of that. I had the guys from Cowspiracy ask me to come on my show years ago, and I'm just like, I don't know, man. I just don't feel good having them on promoting this, because I'm not sure they're right about this stuff. So it just, anytime somebody seems like too extreme in any view, because that's what I love about Dr. Thomas Seyfried. He really, he's not into diet and nutrition. He's just doing research, and he finds the research fascinating. Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, same thing. Like, he's a perfect spokesperson for the diet, because he's not trying to sell you something. He's not trying to get you to jump on board. He's just like, hey, I'm doing research. This is what I found. This is what so it's it's good to have people like that, and yourself, who has a personal story, which I think that's when it hits home the most, when you hear these personal stories. Chris Bell, who's a documentary filmmaker, who's been on my show, he did Bigger, Stronger, Faster, Prescription Thugs, Trophy Kids. He always takes and actually, Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and Leap of Faith about Kratom. I mean, he shares his personal story, his family's problems with addiction, pill issues, all this stuff, and it hits home. And I think for somebody, a casual watcher, it keeps them involved in the documentary, because I think a lot of times, like, if it's just information after information after information, if there's no characters, then it can get boring. So I think the way he does it is also really good too. So I probably should have a question in this long tangent, but
Well, I take great comfort and I understand the value of a personal story. But one of the great advancements in the Charlie Foundation's existence has been, when we started, I felt like I was just this angry dad on the soapbox, yelling and how can you do this? But as more and more physicians and scientists have come on board, then I don't have to do, they give it all real credibility. So if I get an email from somebody saying, why does the ketogenic diet work? I send them a link to Dom talking about mechanisms. Or if from somebody saying, should I be starting my child on a ketogenic diet for whatever reason, I send them a link to Elizabeth Teal at Mass General or Kossoff at Hopkins or any of a number of pediatric neurologists who can answer that question for them. And so that takes a lot of personal burden off me, because it's not just one dad who had one terrific experience. That's where the medical community actually is going.
Yeah, no, I hear. I when I do these shows, it's the same thing. I'm like, well, instead of me talking your ear off for 3 hours, I'm like, here's an episode I did on the topic. And I'll send them the link. So it definitely helps. And a lot of times, like you said, like they might hear some advice from me, and yeah, maybe some people will take it seriously. Some people might be like, well, who is he? He has a 9 to 5 job. I mean, what does he know about diet, nutrition, and health issues or whatnot? But when they hear Dr. Dom D'Agostino talk about it, when they hear people who have the PhD or whatnot, it is one of those things where people are more likely to respect their opinions. Not always, I guess it's not always justified, but it does help. That just happens to be the world that we live in, where if you do have that PhD, if you do have that diploma, then we put you on this this pedestal that, hey, his opinion matters a little more than somebody else's. But
And if you're educated, because I hear from people all the time, they say, well, I learned about the diet, but it's just too much for me. It's too much for my family or whatever. And I'll let it go, I guess, but at least they know. At least they have the education. At least they've educated themselves. What still sticks in my craw from all those years ago is nobody gave us the information. And that's why, as grateful as I am for Charlie's outcome, I'm still pissed because we didn't have. And I think that what you and what I can do and are doing is giving people information so they can make an informed decision.
Yeah, that is the part that bothers me the most. I mean, it's the fact that this, and in some cases, this information is being suppressed, and you hear stories about people. Oh, I read this article about how the keto diet is bad for you. I'm like, wait. There might be some people who might not work as well on it, might have maybe some fatigue or maybe their energy level. But I'm like, bad? Like it's dangerous for you? That's the type. And you do see these clickbait articles, and all you have to do is just plant the seed of doubt, and just and you don't nobody reads the article. People read the headline, and I forget, there was a study about how like nobody reads the article. The percentage of people who will share stuff or I guess just read the headline and then think it's fact before even going into the information. I mean, it's scary how many people just read the headline. So all you have to do is just plant the seed of doubt and just put what is that book, Merchants of Doubt, right? Well, yeah, and I believe it is, right? Merchants of Doubt, and yeah, and there's a documentary also of same title, and yeah, I mean it goes into like, you don't have, if you just give people or make them a little confused, like, okay, there's some conflicting information. Most of the time, they'll just give up. They're just like, oh, I don't know. They'll put their hands up and they'll be like, I don't know. Some people are saying it's good. Some people are saying it's bad. And so when I see these articles, and the timing is always very suspicious to me, because when Kratom was getting popular, I saw the same thing where all of a sudden I start seeing all these articles of like possible death linked to Kratom. But I'm like, where were all these deaths linked to Kratom before it started getting mainstream popularity? Where were all these this research and people having health issues with the keto diet before it became a household name? You just don't see it, and so I mean the timing to me seems a little suspicious, and the problem is that, like we talked about, like when there's money in keeping the system that's alive now alive, there's gonna be interest to not promote this and whatnot. So I mean, if I'm a politician who in my state, we build weapons, we build bombs, I might not want this war, but I have to vote for the war because I have to keep this economy going. This machine has to keep going, and I have to keep these jobs. So I think what's that quote? It's like, it's hard to believe something when your job I forget how the quote goes, but something about like when your job is based on you not believing it, something along those lines. But it's so I think it's a huge issue. We do have to question things. I think, like I tell people on the show all the time, like, don't just believe what I say. I'm like, question what I'm telling you. Go do your own research.
And I think that that goes further, not just the stuff you read or see online, but as opposed to 27 years ago, when we asked the medical community why we shouldn't be using or talk about this ketogenic diet, there were many myths that existed. It'll stunt your growth. It'll cause cardiovascular disease. It's too difficult. There's no science. Lots of stuff like that. And that was, for most people, I think those were pretty effective arguments. Today, all the myths have been disproven, except there's this one that is the mainstream that we've heard that physicians use to dissuade people. And people, if you have a really sick kid, it doesn't take much to talk you out of some treatment. I mean, almost a look, a gesture, a tone of voice can do it. And the main objection today from physicians is it's too difficult. And I always think, and people listen to that, and I always wonder where in medical school, maybe where in medical school do they teach the course that instructs doctors to decide what treatment is too difficult for a family of a sick kid to endure? What is that course? Is that med school 306? I mean, this patient, the family can't get through this diet thing. To me, that's one of the most insidious and finally the most pervasive arguments that's still used today by physicians to talk people out of a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's like telling somebody, hey, physical therapy is going to be hard, so how about you just never walk again?
Right.
It's like it's the same thing. It's the most. That's like physical therapy is way harder than the keto diet if you're dealing with some like bad car crash and you had all these surgeries and broken bones and ligament tendons. It's like it's just to me it's ridiculous. And the thing is, it's really not that hard. I mean, you remove grains and sugars from your diet. It's really not that hard. I mean, I drink water. I do a lot of fasting. Most of the week I intermittent fasting. So, like, for example, today I haven't ate anything. I won't till dinner time. And I can only do it. I know people are like, how do you do that? I'm like, because I couldn't do it before when I was so dependent on glucose. I would eat, and then I get hungry again in a couple hours. Now, once your body's in ketosis, you can go long periods of time without eating. But the things that I eat, I mean, we eat, ribeyes and kielbasa and you can eat fish and you can eat pork and you can eat, it's not like you're that limited. And not just that, fatty things are full of flavor. When they start taking out fat out of stuff, the low fat yogurts, low fat milk, they had to add more sugar because of the fact, which helped the sugar industry, obviously, because they removed a lot of the flavor. So once you start adding fat to your diet, everything has more flavor, cooking with butter and olive oil and avocado oil and all this stuff. It's delicious. It's really good for you. So, this idea that it's hard, to me, it's just, I'm not sure people realize that, most people eat a handful of things anyways. I mean, you don't eat a different meal every day of a month. I mean, you have like some go-tos, like, hey, we do Taco Tuesday, or so it's like you get a couple meals and you slowly transition into it, and you'll see how different you feel.
Yeah, I agree. And again, if we have to differentiate some between serious medical conditions and a ketogenic diet for general health and brain health, but lifestyle changes don't have to be made overnight for most of us. I don't remember the last time I bought a loaf of bread. It's been a while. It just phased out, and then you start phasing out things and phasing in things, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, and your body stops craving it. My wife is is Italian, and when I met her, we could go out to eat, and she would just get a giant bowl of pasta. She wouldn't eat anything else, just pasta. And I'm just like, how do you eat that? And so after a while, I was doing, my diet kind of on my own, and she just like finally gave in, and she's like, you know what, I'm tired of feeling disgusting, and you're feeling great, and whatnot. And she was seeing me getting leaner, and go long periods of time without eating, and whatnot. And so she finally gave it a try, and then she wanted to reward herself after like a month of doing it to go out and have a bowl of pasta. She took 2 bites, and she's like, I can't eat this. She didn't realize that feeling she had of feeling bloated and sluggish, and just feeling like your body is just struggling to digest this food, that became normal to her. And so after you remove that from your, like, where you can eat and not have those feelings, then once you remove that from your life, and then it's like, wow, I don't want this again. I want to be able to eat and be able to just not be in a food coma every time I have a meal, So so your body will actually stop craving it. I mean, it's amazing how addictive sugar is. People don't realize how addictive it is. I mean, removing sugar from your diet, I mean, I think sometimes it's hard because it is super addictive. I mean, and everything you eat, everything you drink has tons of sugar. And then they do it has sugar-free. And it's like, why is this sugar-free thing sweeter than the stuff that has sugar? It's like, because they put some artificial sweetener in it that's probably worse for you than the natural sugar. So it's it's not super simple in regards to, because we're so used to just consuming sugar in everything, but there's tons of delicious stuff you can still eat. I mean, and especially now, because it's gotten so popular. There's so many recipes. People do keto desserts. People do keto. I mean, we do keto lasagna. We do all types of stuff. So it really isn't that hard. Then you have companies like Primal Kitchen that does a bunch of really keto-friendly, awesome products that don't have any sugar. It's based on avocado oil. So you really do. I mean, when you were, first getting into it in the 90s with your son, I mean, there was no Primal Kitchen. There was no keto-friendly anything. You really had everything was from scratch, which might be actually better for you because you're making everything from scratch. But it can be a pain in the butt when you have a busy career, you have a child that needs a lot of attention, and a family of 5 is already a lot of work. So it's I'm sure it wasn't easy.
It wasn't, but it was. We got our kid back.
Which was
so we got paid upfront for anything that we went through, and there's nothing I can't. And I hear from people all the time who use that expression. I got my kid back, and I get chills just saying those words.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. But I know I've taken up a whole bunch of your time, and but thank you so much, Jim. I really, really appreciate it. Once it shows up, I'll send it to you. You guys can post it anywhere. And thank you so much for the work that the Charlie Foundation does, and for sharing the story, and for having this passion to continue doing it, and understanding how important it is. So we're all doing our little part, and I think a lot of times we're not. In our cases, I don't think either one of us we're not motivated because we care about which diet we're promoting. It's about helping people, and I think that's the most important thing. So, but thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Jim. Take care. Have a nice weekend.
You too.
Thanks.